Welcome, everyone, to the Healthy School Food Summit, brought to you by the Coalition for Healthy School Food and PlantPure. I'm your host, Ron Gandiza. In this session, we are honored to have with us Antonia Demas, the founder and director of the Food Studies Institute. Antonia Demas has a Ph.D. in Education, Nutrition, and Anthropology from Cornell University. Dr. Dimas has worked in various capacities for over 40 years, developing food-based curriculums and teaching food studies in a variety of educational settings with people of diverse ages, as well as ethnic and socio-economic backgrounds. Because of her excitement about the learning and health improvements that occur among children when they have positive sensory-based hands-on experience with food, she has devoted herself to engaging in research to document this observation scientifically, and her dissertation won 2 national awards for excellence in creativity. She's the founder and director of the Food Studies Institute based in Trumansburg, New York, a nonprofit devoted to improving the long-term health and education of children and their families. And her curriculum, Food is Elementary, has been successfully used in more than 3,000 schools in 35 states. She consults throughout the U.S. and abroad and trains and certifies teachers as food educators. Dr. Dimas is a visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health and at the University of Illinois Medical. Thank you so much for joining us, Antonia.
Oh, my pleasure.
When I see that you had a program put in 3,000 schools in 35 states, I can appreciate that because it's hard to get a program in one school, let alone 3,000 schools where it has the credibility, it has the studies to back it up because, as you know, schools really look to other schools to see what works to make sure that they don't take unnecessary risks. So it's a credit to your work.
Well, it's become more challenging in recent times because of all the demands on schools to teach for the test rather than for real hands-on learning experiences. So it's become way more difficult in recent years.
Before we get started, tell me a little more about your story. Why did you get into nutrition and really focused on schools?
Well, I got into this when I was a child. I started cooking and gardening when I was very young and loved it. And then when I was 14, I became a vegetarian. And this was in the dark ages of vegetarianism. I had never heard of other vegetarians. I just didn't like the idea of eating animals. So I just quit eating them. And so that really inspired me to learn as much as I could about nutrition and cooking. It's been a lifelong passion of mine to really learn as much as I could about the environment and growing food and preparing healthful meals. I started working as a young woman at a Head Start center, and this Head Start center had 60 kids in it, so it was a large center. It was in Vermont, and what I did, since I love to cook, is I started cooking with the kids on a daily basis. I did this because I thought the philosophy of Head Start was excellent, but there was one missing link, and that was the food that was served to the kids every day. They served them hot dogs, and they cooked things, but a lot of the foods were not of optimal nutrition. So I decided one way to try to get the kids more interested in eating a healthful diet was to cook with them. What I noticed was if kids literally have a hand in preparing the food, they will eat whatever they cook. So I tested this out on a daily basis, and it really worked. That's how I got started with this hands-on cooking in educational settings, and I've been doing it ever since. That was in 1971 that I got started at the Head Start Center. For 25 years, I worked in various capacities, cooking with kids in schools and other settings in other countries. It was pretty universal that when kids really had the sensory experience with the food, and math, science, social studies, art, music, literature was part of the lesson, they really loved doing this, and they would eat what they prepared. So I had a large sample of kids in the U.S. and in other countries that I tested this out on, and without exception, the kids were very receptive. I spent 25 years doing this, and what I noticed was a lot of educators didn't think this was serious academic work. Some did, but others didn't. And I thought one way to counter that, to get more credibility for this concept, was to learn more research skills and do a major research project at a major research institution. That led me to T. Colin Campbell as my nutrition advisor at Cornell University. So I got my Ph.D. at midlife working with Colin and two other professors, Joanne Egner in education and Bob Asher in anthropology. And I did this major research study that really proved that kids will eat healthy foods if they learn how to cook it, how to grow it, and learn about the nutrition behind it. After I got my PhD, I founded my nonprofit and have consulted with lots of different organizations since. I continue to document everything I do, and I try to anticipate what the critics will say of why they can't do something in their particular school. So I address cost, I address time, I show that kids retain what they learn when all five senses are engaged in the learning process, as well as cognition. Most of us learn best through sensory education, yet most curricula in schools do not deliberately employ the sensory aspect of learning. So when you're trying to remember something for a test and you think, what did it look like, smell like, taste like, etc., it's easier to remember than when you're just relying on memory.
I wish more teachers would take a look at sensory education, but why is it that schools don't?
It's because of time, and it's because of the fact that our standardized test scores seem to be the gold standard. So the approach, in my view, is to teach for the test, which takes the fun out of learning, rather than teaching for content and problem-solving skills, which can be applied to taking tests later on. So I think the approach doesn't reward kids for thinking on their own and asking questions. And my approach is to get the kids to really start thinking, because I ask a lot of questions rather than give answers that they are to memorize. And most kids do not get rewarded for asking questions. To me, that natural curiosity that kids are born with about the world needs to be rewarded. Plus, the time constraints on the school day make it so anything seen as extra or an outside program is really hard to fit into the school day. They've eliminated a lot of programs in many schools, like physical education or art or music. And to me, those are very vital programs for the kid on so many levels. So the approach is aimed at teaching for the test rather than teaching for rewarding kids for being curious about the learning that is supposed to happen in schools.
What is the Food is Elementary program?
The Food is Elementary program is food literacy that starts with safety issues about why we need clean hands, why we need clean healthy soil to grow food in. Then we go through basic nutrition concepts that we teach the kids, and it works up into cooking skills, basic cooking skills, and then multicultural education. So the kids learn about cultures of the world through cooking their recipes. I also think this is really important in promoting tolerance of other cultures. When your introduction to a culture is through something very positive, such as delicious food that they prepare, you learn about geography, you learn about their history, you learn so many things about that culture. And if the food experience is delicious, which it is, then when you meet somebody from that culture later on, you're predisposed to be positive towards them rather than thinking that you should be afraid of them or that they're different and scary. So to me, it's a way to really promote tolerance towards people as well as to foods that adults think kids will never eat. I have so much data that really proves the kids just need positive education about these foods without the adult saying, I know you're a kid, so you probably hate vegetables. That's the wrong approach. If you put vegetables or other healthy foods in the center of the curriculum, and the kids get to do experiments with them and they get to be creative with them, they will get very excited about it. So the thing that drives me crazy is educators need to realize the solution is positive education. You can't go from A to B without some sort of positive education guiding you to change your thought process. So it's about education and keeping it in a fun, hands-on way in the school. And the kids respond extremely well.
What age groups do you start?
I've worked with preschool to senior citizens, so I've worked with all ages, but I concentrate on the earlier years because I think that's when kids are most receptive to sensory-based education, and when they have an innocence about the world, so they're naturally curious. They ask a lot of questions. So I think that the early years are key. Plus, you expand their palates, and by exposing their taste buds to a large variety of health-promoting foods at a young age. So they've got this memory in their taste buds of different tastes.
Walk me through a typical program set up at a school.
It varies tremendously. I'll take basically whatever they will offer in terms of time, because I truly believe that once they see it, they will buy into it. So ideally, it should be at least an hour a day, but the ideal is not recognized that often. So what typically happens is I get a random call from a parent who's really concerned about what the schools are serving their kids in the lunch program, and they don't know what to do. So my advice is to get other parents involved, be positive, don't go in and say the school food is terrible. Go in with some solutions that you're willing to help find funding for or resources for. And don't do it alone. There's power in numbers, and really the parents are the consumers here. Their kids are in the school. I've had so many parents say to me things like, well, I don't want to just do it because I'm concerned about my kid. Well, if the parent isn't going to be an advocate for their kid, who else is going to be? So they should feel proud of that. But the approach can't be just criticizing a negative, because the schools will not be very receptive if that's not if that is the approach. Instead, if you get a group of parents together who really do some planning and organizing of what could be viable in terms of a solution, which will include raising funds initially, then that's a much more constructive approach.
That is pretty common, right? Where parents go to the school and say this food is not very nutritious and we'd like to replace it.
And often the cafeteria staff gets blamed for it when there's little, if any, training for cafeteria staff. I've done a lot of work with cafeteria staff, and I've found when you give them training and you teach them about nutrition and healthier recipes, they are receptive if you treat them respectfully. So this has emerged. The school lunch meal climate has emerged over many, many years. A lot of it has to do with the foods that are subsidized by the Department of Agriculture, which have, in terms of their nutritional quality, have really denigrated over the years. So the more people know about the history of the school lunch program and what is possible, what the laws are, the more you can advocate for positive changes within the system that is in place. And I think the parents need to really be educated about what's possible, as well as not being too negative in terms of just criticizing without offering a viable solution.
Now, have you seen changes from, as you say, you started back in the 1970s, right? Program. Have
Yes.
you seen positive changes happen since then, or has it been more negative?
I've seen a mix of changes. I've seen the quality of the commodity foods deteriorate. We subsidize foods that are often not the most nutritious foods, and we've followed the eating trends of the U.S. in going towards more processed foods. So the commodity foods used to be individual foods from the farm, and now a lot of them are processed foods. So I think that's a negative trend. These are foods that are free to the schools to make it affordable to run the lunch program. I've seen efforts in terms of school gardening programs and trying to make some positive changes in the quality of food. But the problem, in my view, is it's hard to keep it going on a regular basis because of the funding issue. I've seen the money dry up for outside programming. When I got started, it was easier to get grants, and now it's gotten much more difficult to get funding for these programs. I'm of the opinion, I've worked in all these schools all over the country, and I feel that unless there's a plan for program sustainability, it's almost more cruel to introduce the kids to a program such as Food is Elementary, where they learn to read labels and they understand that some of the processed foods have no whole foods in them. And they start asking all these questions about why should I eat things that are full of chemicals. So they know the difference, but then that difference is not reflected in the school meals. They're still eating the same foods every day. So I'm really trying to focus now on getting long-term programs rather than a one-time grant-funded program where the kids get teased with this information. They get really interested, and then it's taken away from them. So they know the difference, but they don't see it reflected in terms of changes within the school food environment because the funding dries up. So I'm really focused on working on programs that can become more permanent in the future.
I guess then the success, or at least in your experience, a successful program is one that implements both the education program, like Food is Elementary, and changes to the menu at the same time.
Yes, yes. But the education program has to come first because I've done a number of studies that show once the kids learn about the food, they know its history, they know how to grow it, they know how to cook it, they make these delicious recipes that they like. Then and this was what my dissertation more than 20 years ago was based on. Then when they see that food offered in the lunch program, they'll eat it. So this is a way for the schools not to lose money from school meals, but still have the kids in a position where they will have healthy food to eat. And we often do choices. So they have either the recipe that I developed or the standard recipe, which might be a hot dog or hamburger, and they choose mine more often than the other because they've been educated about it. So the school still has to make money on the meal program, but the education has to happen first. So changing the meal program, I've seen this happen where somebody will go in and just try to change the food without any education, and the kids reject it. Because they don't know what it is. The kids are being logical. They're not being resistant just for the sake of being resistant. They're being sensible because they don't know what that food is and they haven't learned about it. Education takes time, and a lot of people don't want to spend the time really educating the kids about the foods first. But it's really essential for success.
You know, it's a critical situation now because we've seen it in the news where, you know, the government is reducing or eliminating nutritional standards, for instance, saying, and the excuse being, or the rationale being that students have been throwing away this healthy food because they don't like the taste, and it costs more for the schools to create these healthy meals, which are being thrown away. So that's the logic, that the schools, rather than trying to educate the kids on why they should be eating healthier, they just say, well, let the schools produce less nutritional food, just so the kids eat more and are not wasting the food in their terms. So it's really undermining the whole program, using that as an excuse.
Exactly. Schools are in the business of education, and what better education than a safe, healthy learning environment, which starts with healthy food. But it takes time, and that's where the problem lies, I think. They don't want to give the time to really educate kids without recognizing that this type of learning incorporates all the academic subjects. It incorporates everything if you approach it in the right way. Plus, kids who don't do well in the traditional school environment because they have different learning styles, they tend to excel in this type of program. They get out of their seats, they get to move around, they get to talk, they get to do group learning with their peers. So it really reaches different learning styles as well.
Well, but that brings up another good point about your programs, because your programs have been implemented in some low-income neighborhoods and schools where you wouldn't expect to see a program like this, right? Where they're more concerned about their academics, getting their academics up. But a program like yours has been adopted by a number of schools in areas like Baltimore school system, where you've got kids who don't traditionally eat healthy because they may be in a food desert, for instance, right?
Exactly right. This improves their academics. I'll just give you one example. I document as much as I can, and when you look at the vocabulary that increases just by the exposure to foods that they learn about and eat, they may have 80 new words that are all food related. So, and they remember them because they remember the whole process of tasting and smelling and growing and cooking. So it really enhances learning, and they go home and they share this information with their families. That's another huge benefit of this program that I've seen repeatedly over the years. The kids get so excited that they go home and they want to cook the recipe with their families or for their families. They want to grow things in a garden. They clean out the cupboards from junk foods because they have learned what's really in those foods, which aren't really foods, and they don't want to eat that way. So really the best way to get to the family is through the kid. What parent is not going to be happy when their young child comes home and wants to cook dinner, a healthy dinner for the family?
What was some of the pushback from the school system when you first approached them?
I hold up the Baltimore program as what I would love to see all over the country, and I'll tell you about it. It's not just because my daughter is the food literacy educator. I am, of course, biased, but she's totally qualified for this and has been her whole life. In 2003, I was invited to bring my program to Baltimore, and I said, if I can get funding, I'll bring it to Baltimore. And Baltimore at that time was much more of a food desert than it is now. Baltimore has a lot of challenges in terms of the school system, as many communities do. So I got funding, and I approached different principals, and the first one to sign up, I said to him, I'm willing to try to get grant funding for 3 years because I think it will take 3 years to make this program visible in Baltimore and in your school community. I want educators and parents to see that this program does not take away from the educational substance, it only adds to it. And I will document the effect it has on the kids in the school community. And I'll give you the report that I write that documents this. So we did the program. We worked with the art community and painted murals on the walls. We got a big award for the school garden that was put in the first year. We involved a lot of different resources within Baltimore. 3 years went by, and the principal said, can't you try to get funding one more year? And I said, no, I'm really serious. I can't keep trying to get funding from outside sources. You need to buy into it. So he found the funding after 3 years, and the program has been completely financially independent since. My daughter teaches close to 800 students, age 4 to 14. They have community dinners 4 times a year. They garden. They learn about nutrition. They love it. And it's had major impact on her school population. So that's what I'm holding up as a sustainable program. And I really do hope that other schools take notice and try to have a food educator in their schools, because I think every school needs to have a food literacy educator. It has positive impact on environmental concerns. The kids learn about organic gardening. They learn about how food is produced. It has positive impact on their health because they enjoy eating healthier foods. Nobody's forcing it on them, but they've been exposed in a positive way, and so they enjoy it. And it has positive impact on their learning. It increases their curiosity. It's a starting point for asking questions about foods of the world and people of the world. So I only see benefits in programs like this, and I really do wish there would be a food literacy educator in every school in the country.
Funding goes to support specifically what part of the program? Does it pay for the teachers or the curriculum in terms of books? What does that money go to?
It goes to training the food literacy educator. It goes to paying them. It goes to the food, the gardening supplies, the research involved in the first few years that document the effect it's having on the kids, on their education, on their families. So it takes, I still believe it takes about 3 years to really get the buy-in and demonstrate that this is effective on multiple levels. Plus, the fact that our current educational climate is all about taking the test and documenting those results. Schools have become places where hands-on learning is really being wiped out because of the time constraints put on educators to teach for the test primarily. So it's a very different climate, and I think we need to get back to hands-on learning, doing projects that take time, that really make it so kids can learn a tremendous amount on their own with their peers. There isn't the same kind of time for that type of learning in most schools.
It seems like a program like this where you need to commit more time to it, that would be another potential resistance.
Time and money.
Right? Time and money. So I'm curious again on the money part. So you were writing grants for the schools, and I guess grants being funded by the federal government?
Well, various organizations. But I'm not doing that now because the money has pretty much dried up. It's gotten very difficult. So what I'm doing, since I've developed a huge amount of data over the years, I've worked with lots of diverse populations, including incarcerated teenagers and just lots of diverse populations. And I have incredible data that I've painstakingly collected over the years. So I'm writing a book about it because I think the data really demonstrates the cost effectiveness of this approach, that you can save money in terms of the cost of the meals if you use the healthy commodity foods that are available. I've documented that over the years, that there's less absenteeism, which costs schools money if the kids are healthier because they're eating healthier foods out of their own choice because they've been educated about it. So there are many different approaches that I've developed research studies around. I go to the school and say, what questions are you most interested in finding the answer to? And we work together to develop a plan to document this that won't take a lot of time in terms of the actual research component, but we get results that I've written up and documented, and I've got all this information I've been sitting on for many years, and I just really want to get that out to the public domain. So I'm writing a book on food literacy using some of my studies as case studies that demonstrate the multiple positive effects this type of education has.
Wow, that's so needed, Dr. Demas.
Yeah, and I've spent countless hours writing grants, and I'm not doing that for the most part anymore because I don't think my writing has deteriorated. I think we're in a much more hostile research climate. So I'm not going to spend all those hours writing grants that don't come through. I'm writing this book instead, which is taking time, but I think it's important to get this information out in an accessible form. And that's why I'm doing it as case studies. And I'm including the kids' voice through their journals. They all keep food journals and pictures of the kids and different voices besides my own and the data. I'm trying to make it user-friendly in terms of the writing style.
So your book really becomes, with the research and the results that you document and the benefits for the kids, for the schools, for the parents. And as you said, there are multiple levels, right? This isn't just about learning cooking skills or learning about nutrition, but there are other benefits as well. Then this becomes the basis to get funding, right? For schools, whether it's through their own ways of finding money through internally within the administration, or even going outside, finding sponsors, for instance, for a program like this, maybe even corporate sponsors.
Yes, and my personal philosophy is to just say yes when it comes to kids or education. But I realize over the years that when people don't buy into it themselves by putting some money into it, they're not going to give it the same amount of attention. So I want them to come to me now instead of me just raising the money and paying for everything. It's gotten way too hard for me as a small nonprofit to do that. And I think the psychology just doesn't work like that anymore.
Right.
So if they want it, they'll appreciate it more if they raise some money on their own. And some of the funders that I've worked with over the years have said the school has to buy into it. They have to put something into it. The schools typically don't. So if they really want it and believe in the educational substance of this program, they will find the money.
So Dr. Demas, what's the impact if schools do not do a program like this, or any food literacy program? Because we know there's an impact to kids now, even just from a pure health perspective. What are some of the big things that you see trend-wise in the health of kids?
I believe we need a new paradigm. We need to throw out the old, which includes minor incremental steps to make some changes, which are not substantial enough to get results. I really believe we need to demonstrate the cost effectiveness of this type of education on multiple levels, which include the kids learn to think better so they do better on the test. They enjoy being in school more because it's fun. They get to do projects, that there's less absenteeism, that the parents are involved more in the process because they enjoy being part of the education as well. There's so many benefits to this type of program, but I think the bottom line is going to be the cost effectiveness argument. You have to pay money initially to make this program visible by getting grant money, but in the end, you save money after a few years because it really is cost effective. If the kids are eating healthier foods, if the meals cost less, if the schools are growing things locally, you're going to save money in the end, but we need the vision that it's going to take a few years to get the data to really demonstrate that things improve with this type of learning environment. Who wants to go to school when you're stressed about taking tests and the education is about memorizing things for the test? If you get to go out in the garden and learn science and all about nature and insects and soil, that's really fun. I just see so many kids who put their hands in the soil and get so excited when they see insects they've never seen before. They're curious about what those insects are. So it's a starting point of many valuable learning experiences that kids are not having because of the time constraints, among other things.
One of the big things is, as I mentioned, on the impact of not doing a program like this is continuing to see the child obesity rate go up. And we talk about the health costs related to obesity-related diseases, like type 2 diabetes, for instance. And we see early cases now of heart disease, even in kids. It seems to me like a lot of administrators don't take that into account.
It takes long-term thinking to appreciate those effects, but I worked with the Hopkins students a number of years ago who did a study on food as elementary in Baltimore. At the time, it was in multiple schools in Baltimore. She is an MD. As she was getting her master's in public health, and she worked with me and studied the effect of food as elementary in Baltimore and wrote a paper on it. What she did was look at the cost of implementing food as elementary in all the elementary and middle schools in Baltimore. She had interviewed all the principals and the schools involved initially, and then she looked at the actual dollar cost of doing this, and she compared it then to the cost of treating treating type 2 diabetes. And she found that getting food as elementary in all these schools affecting 13,000 kids would be cost effective if you pay for all the expenses, the food educator, the gardening materials, the food materials, and cooking equipment. The biggest expense was personnel. She found that if it could prevent one case of type 2 diabetes, it was cost effective. The cost just increases over time, but we don't think that way. The other thing that I think people need to become more aware of is looking at the way the government runs school lunch program is orchestrated. Now, the commodity program started out as a way to make foods available to schools for free to help defray the cost. The school lunch history, I've written about the school lunch history, and that's going to be a section in my book. But it started out as a way to feed hungry kids. Kids were forced to go to school. It was mandated in 1918, and there was no food available. So poor kids had nothing to eat. It was after both World War I and World War II that it was discovered that a third of the young men, and they were only men back then, who tried to enlist in the armed services were rejected due to poor nutrition. Their poor nutrition came from too few calories, too few nutrients. Ironically, today, a third of the young men and women who try to enlist in the armed services are rejected due to poor nutrition. But it stems from too few nutrients, too many calories. So these 18-year-olds are too unhealthy at age 18 to be accepted in the armed services. It's the same figure, a third and a third. So that's basically, back after World War II, there was public outcry that we're the richest country in the world, and yet a third of our young men aren't fit to be in the armed services. That's why it got started, but it started with a dual purpose. One was to make it affordable to have a national program to ensure that all kids had something to eat, poor kids could eat for free. Two was to provide an outlet for surplus foods. During World War II, there was a big effort in terms of school gardens to really have all these families support the war effort by growing as much food as possible so the communities could be sustained. So there was a surplus of agricultural foods on the market. The government said, okay, we can help farmers and schools by this School Lunch Act of 1946. We can make these surplus foods available to schools to defray the cost, and we can subsidize farmers by buying any surplus foods they have. So the surplus food program was part of the School Lunch Act of 1946. What happened was it rapidly became the demise of small family farms and encouraged agribusiness, because the larger the farm, the bigger the agricultural subsidy. What I think we need to really examine is the fact that we could be now subsidizing small family farms. That way, people say, oh, well, there's no way we can get organic foods into the school lunch program. Yes, there is a way. If we subsidize the local organic farmers, they need the money. It would be less cost in terms of transportation. It would be much healthier food. So it could be a win-win solution. And we need to start looking at what is possible in terms of changing the priorities. So our kids would get the healthiest food available at what would end up being the least cost possible. So I think we need a group of citizens to really start looking at these issues on a national scale and advocating for change.
Basically, these three different areas within a community, the schools, which include the parents and the students, the local farmers, and corporate America, private companies, together, hopefully with the support of the local government, all together to really make this a full grassroots community effort.
That's right. Schools have increasingly become community centers because people have realized we pay taxes to support our schools. What are they doing for the community? So they've opened their doors to extra classes, all sorts of things that were not part of the school routine in the past. This type of program could really benefit the people who live in the surrounding community of the school. Schools are community centers, and they should be because they're supported by all of us. We need to know what's going on in the schools because everybody's future depends on how these kids are educated. They're going to be making decisions about all of us in the future depending on how long they live. These kids really need to have a great education. And I think the public has an interest in seeing that they're getting the highest quality education available.
Well, right there, I'm writing notes as you're speaking. I'm just furiously writing notes because I'm of course I'm a thinker like you in terms of always having these ideas and wanting to improve things, right? And as I'm looking at these notes, it seems to me I keep circling one word, and it's lead, because the people that are listening to this call right now, you have an opportunity to lead the community, to lead with schools, taking a leadership role, not taking a backseat role, but taking a leadership role in helping kids and helping local farmers and helping government organizations and private companies and citizens to take an active role in helping kids.
Yes, it's in everybody's interest to be involved in the educational system.
The sheer amount of work that you've done over the past 40 years is absolutely amazing. And I've had multiple people, when we said we were doing this summit, to really explore the best practices, right, of getting healthier food into schools. Your name came up multiple times because you're just recognized as a pioneer, really, within the space. So I really want to thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Well, I appreciate your words, and I have to say I'm still passionate after all these years. I know what the challenges are, but what I have in my vision is all these images of the kids, and I really think they deserve this type of education. I've seen thousands and thousands of them respond. They deserve this, and hopefully we'll have a food literacy educator in every school in the country at one point in our time.
Well, where can people find more information about your programs?
They can find it. Well, my website isn't the greatest right now. It's being redone, but my website, www.foodstudies.org. Stay tuned because hopefully it's going to get its renovation. Or they can contact me if they are interested in exploring options to get the program in their school. I can give you my email, which
we'll
is
actually have your contact
okay
here within the.
Yes, they can contact me, and when my book is available, that will also be a source of information.
We look forward to that book, and we'll be interviewing you again when that book comes out. So please keep us informed about when.
Oh, great. Also, there's a woman in Hawaii who I wrote a book on preventing and reversing type 2 diabetes. It's geared towards kids. It's based on a true story. It's called Surprises in Millie's Suitcase. You can get it through Amazon or through the publisher Sunstone Press. So it's for people of all ages, but we wrote a story that kids can understand.
Right, so, and I believe they can find more information about that on your website as well, right? At foodstudies.org. I encourage everyone to check it out because there's a treasure trove of information that Antonia has put together, and we look forward to more of that being put forth in her forthcoming book. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Demas.
My pleasure.
Okay. And for our audience, if you want to learn more about the efforts of the Coalition for Healthy School Food, just visit healthyschoolfood.org, as well as learn more about PlantPure and the plant-based movement at plantpurenation.com.